The future of cars is accessible, but true innovation starts with everyone at the table. Automakers keep talking about the future of mobility, but let's be real. Today we're diving into a conversation the industry can't afford to ignore. Now, how real communication and collaboration, not compliance and guilt, are driving through innovation with drivers with disability. If you care about new car designs, breakthroughs, and the next big wave of customers in the auto industry, these are the customers the auto industry actually needs to win. So you really need to hear this particular podcast. Welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about why accessibility isn't just a legal box to check. It's the next frontier of car innovation, brand loyalty, and real leadership in the industry. Joining me today is Maxwell Ivey Jr., better known as the Blind Blogger, a powerhouse of resilience, inspiration, and action. Despite losing his sight, Max built a thriving online presence through his site, blindblogger.net, where he shares real stories of overcoming obstacles, building businesses, and living life without excuses. He's an author, podcaster, coach, and speaker who proves that determination beats limitation every single time. If you're ready for authentic motivation and practical wisdom, Max is the voice you really need to hear. Follow the Blind Blogger and start seeing possibilities instead of barriers. Maxwell, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Oh, thank you. Before we jump in, make sure you hit that subscribe button because here we discuss the real issues facing the auto industry, which is the industry's blind spot. Let's start big. Where is the auto industry still missing the mark when it comes to accessibility? So, and why does compliance create worse outcomes than through collaboration?
Right. I would say the biggest blind spot has to do with the size of the audience and the potential purchasing power of people with disabilities. There's still a large number of people in the auto industry and in other manufacturing industries that don't believe there is a market for their product among people with disabilities. And if there is a market for their products among disabled people, then we don't have the wherewithal to purchase those products. And so the first place you have to start is really expanding the understanding of the size of the community. You're talking about somewhere between 1 in 4 to 1 in 6, depending on what part of the world you're talking about, because less developed parts of the world have more blindness than the more developed parts of the world do. But let's just say if we go with like 1 in 5 here in the United States and North America, that would be somewhere around 50 to 75 million people. 15 to say 20 million of them would probably have some sort of vision loss.
Wow.
There's also a lot of people who don't equate challenges of getting older, which include vision loss, hearing loss, and loss of mobility. They don't count that as having a disability, even though it results in many of the same challenges. So there's the size. There's a lot more people out there than most business owners would think. The second part is they don't understand the loyalty of the community, where if a company produces a quality product and they deliver it in an accessible manner, or at least in an inclusive manner, then we will stick with those companies through good times and bad times. And in many cases, we will overpay for accessibility features, or we will see accessibility as a value-added proposition that explains possibly paying a higher price for a product that has been made accessible. That's not the preferred outcome, but it does happen. And it is something that manufacturers and business owners in general should keep in mind. The third part is we advocate for businesses that make the effort. So while we may not make the eventual purchase, we have these millions of friends, family members, coworkers, social media followers, and those people who are socially conscious, who want to support efforts of inclusion, such as accessibility, or such as gender or race or nationality.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a huge market that is highly loyal, that will advocate for brands willing to make the effort. And when it comes to the sale of large items like automobiles, then I may not make the final purchase. But if I'm part of a couple or a household, I will definitely have an impact on that final decision. And it could be a very small thing between my feeling comfortable in a vehicle that I'm looking at spending 25, 50, $75,000 for and not being comfortable in it. And if I'm not comfortable, the other people in the equation are not going to be comfortable. And in the case of physical disabilities like paraplegia and quadriplegic, where you need specially designed vehicles, those vehicles, they don't get sold without addressing accessibility. But you'd be surprised how small a thing it can be. It really can be just a matter of having physical buttons as opposed to a touch screen, or having both options, because very few touch screens are accessible.
Right.
It could, the other part of this is people's websites. The person who will drive that vehicle, they may not have the time to do the research, but their spouse, their child, their coworker may have the time to do that research, and that person may have the disability.
Right.
So we really don't know who is doing the research or who is impacting the final decision. So can we really afford to take the chance of missing a sale or multiple sales or sales over generations because we weren't willing to try to understand the needs of people with disabilities and make them feel welcome in the vehicles that their families or businesses are going to be using?
Right. You touched on two things earlier, and one is of concern to everyone, and I'm glad you brought that up, which is we're all getting old. We will get old if we live long enough. And some of us are going to be losing our sight or mobility to move around. And that is not captured as part of having a disability. And it's really concerning because so many of us actually live to be up into a particular age where we have to actually depend on someone else. So we have to take all that into consideration. The other part you touched on, which I appreciate because I've worked in the automotive dealership environment, and purchasing a car that is retrofitted for someone with a physical disability is far more expensive than to purchase one right off the lot. And even when you purchase that car and then you have to go to the aftermarket to purchase some of those items, like a ramp, or take the seats out at the back to have that extra room, and then have additional options and features within that car to assist that individual, that is also an additional expense. But the next question I wanted to ask is, what's one story you've seen where communication actually changed a vehicle design for the better?
Actually changed a vehicle design for the better. It's been a long time since I've been in a new vehicle. My family tends to drive until the wheels fall off.
We're there right now because, I mean, with the price of cars, people are holding on to their beta cars much, much longer.
Right. But I would say one thing that most people probably don't think about is there's kind of become this thing where all cars have to have 16 or 18 or 20-inch wheels on them. And while this is not really an accessibility thing, a lot of people, that makes it difficult for them to get in and out of a vehicle, even if they don't have a disability.
Yeah.
So, the size of tires has become almost like a predetermined thing that all cars will have as big a tires as possible. It kind of goes against people who are shorter or people who have less balance and ability to move up and down and side to side. So I would say that that's probably one of those things, as it's become a trend, it's probably caused some women to maybe avoid certain models of vehicles, and also some older people who have less ability to move freely, to eliminate some vehicles from consideration because they have to be able to comfortably be able to get in and out of the vehicle.
Yes.
And that extends, of course, past that to people who have walkers. I'm a fairly large man. I'm 6'5" and 300 pounds. I've never been small. I'm never going to be small. It hasn't changed my decision on making a purchase or other people that I know personally. I personally would pick a different vehicle if I could be guaranteed that the seatbelt will pull far enough over towards the front.
No, what are you talking about?
Yeah, but who wants to have has to have an extender? Yeah, I know they have those. Matter
Yeah.
of fact, I talked to a Lyft driver the other day. I'm like, man, you should get those and carry them around with them. Then I said, oh, wait a minute, I got a better idea. You should start selling them to other Lyft drivers.
There you
But I
go. Yeah.
mean, it's an emotional thing. It's a big person thing. We don't like to have to get extenders.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if they would just maybe add a couple more, if somebody was known for having more generous seatbelt dimensions or extension lengths or whatever, that would probably, the other thing that bothers me all the time, I still haven't figured this out. I would say probably 90 to 95% of the cars I have gotten in and out of over the last few years, I was relatively comfortable once I got in them. But what is it with all these really narrow door entries?
Yes.
Can you tell me why it is?
Everything has gotten smaller. I mean, when was the last time you went on an aircraft? Spirit, Frontier, all these new low cost airlines. The leg room, everything else is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So
I know, I've been through it. What I mean though is, once I get through the door,
yes,
I'm relatively comfortable. The size of the seat in the car or truck is fine. But for some reason, and I cannot figure out how this would affect the aerodynamics of a vehicle at all,
Mhm.
for some reason, the opening of the doorway
yeah.
into the vehicle is very narrow.
Yeah, it's not wide enough like before. I would basically just say I think they're loading from a safety standpoint, because if the doors are open wide enough, then someone drives right past and dings it right off. So that's one of the possibilities.
That could be. But all I know is that I have a friend who takes me to church who's got one of them little Toyota pickups. And I have to squat down like I'm going to hold the ball for the NFL kicker to kick the ball through the uprights, get into his truck. I'm also pitching the idea for a podcast. It's going to be me, and I'm going to be taking Ubers to places, and there'll be somebody taking video of me getting in and out of these little Uber cars.
Right.
And that'll be the video appeal, and then I'll interview the drivers.
Most Ubers, to be frank, a lot of guys who are going into Uber, they're trying to get the smallest and the cheapest cars they can do as possible. One, fuel economy, and two, smaller car payments, low maintenance costs. So there's a lot of factors that are going in. But I'm glad you're on that topic, because what are the biggest myths you think automakers still believe about customers with disabilities?
Well, I think the number one myth, and this is because I suffer from this some of the time myself as a consultant and a coach, the number one myth is that we're all broke.
Happy to hear that part of it.
There is this still underlying assumption that there are none of us out here who have the money to buy a vehicle if we were the ones even making the decision in the first place. But so that's one of the first big ones they got to get past, is that we're all broke, because there are quite a few people out there with disabilities, single people and parts of couples that are making good money either from regular employment or from self-employment or from being a sole entrepreneur. So there are many, many people out there with a disability who can afford to buy the vehicle.
Right.
So that's the number one. The second one is one that I can't document, but I have a feeling about it. And this is that the assumption of the credit agencies, many of which are tied to the manufacturers and their dealers,
Yes.
that the credit people have an assumption that we are a worse risk when it comes to making the payments.
Okay.
That one I just have a feeling about.
Right. But I would probably think they have all that data in their information
You would
database
think.
in terms of looking at it, because everything goes according to credit scores. That's what they emphasize in today's financial world. How's your credit? Not knowing the fact that, you may have something stashed away. Most people want to pay cash these days, but a lot of people try to live off credit as much as possible. And we have this thing now where, the government was pushing a lot of us towards electric vehicle, the electric innovation and everything else. And I've never seen none of these companies that come out with a vehicle to say, okay, we're also going to meet the needs of individuals with disabilities, because that will mean, much more expenses, as I mentioned before. Buying a car retrofitted for individuals with particular disabilities takes much, much more. But
I'm glad you brought that up, because in my opinion, the electric vehicles is kind of a unique situation, because the EVs are so new. I mean, they really should have built in accessibility to start with, or built in the options of adding accessibility in the manufacturing process, the way cars are manufactured nowadays, but they haven't. And then, of course, the other challenge is when you own a vehicle is somebody with a disability navigating the process of charging that vehicle, especially when they're charging it at a station away from their home.
Exactly. Yeah. No, you're talking. And they have to know exactly where to go for these particular charging station. I just remembered, based on what you mentioned earlier, the dealerships and the manufacturers, they have a thing called a UIO, which is the total units in operation. I just remembered, it's been so long since I left the dealership. And this is where they actually know who their customers are. So persons who actually bought from them over a particular period of time, and it has to do a lot with when people buy the cars, if the cars are still under warranty, if the cars are going out of warranty, and what the status of those actual customers are, and how long ago have they been back to the dealership.
Right.
They know who they're,
but they don't know the whole picture of their customer, because the UIO information only represents the person who made the purchase.
Exactly. But it also represents the persons who've been back to the dealership to have done periodic maintenance services as well. And they also use it to try to resell you a car, because they say, okay, Mr. Ivey bought a car 5 years ago. I think he needs a new one. So they start calling you up, sending you text messages. You'll get the text, the call alerts, everything else. You get a call from the sales rep and try to give you the sales talk, the sweet talk, and say, hey, you need a new car. That one is growing too old on you. So that's what they basically do.
The way they communicate is one of those things where accessibility could really be helping them. For example, if you're going to communicate with your customers via text message, then it would really help to know what the ideal length of a text message is for somebody using a magnified screen or somebody using a screen reader, because when you're using a screen reader, the longer the message, the more difficult it is to hear the entire message. A lot of people use emojis, stickers, and GIFs indiscriminately. My computer has to describe each and every one of those, your handle or your profile, and then it has to describe each and every one of those every time you send me an email or a message. So, having communication that is accessible, where the alternative text of images is described, where website links and buttons are properly labeled, where videos have descriptions so you know what the video is going to be of. So, where you have closed captions and transcriptions, and where you have audio descriptions where possible. I personally find it interesting that, given the kind of money the automobile industry spends advertising their products, that I have yet to hear. I've only heard one. I think it was maybe a Hyundai. I've only heard one commercial for a car manufacturer that had what are called audio descriptions. That's where a narrator will tell you what's going on the screen when the actors aren't speaking. Audio description is pretty common in television shows, movies, and even starting to become more common in live events. But the thing is these audio described programs, they're basically a way of communicating with this audience that we were talking about earlier. There are a lot of people who don't need the descriptions that are starting to discover the descriptions, because it allows them to enjoy their movie or TV program without actually facing the screen, so that they can do other things they need to do and still enjoy their program. So surprised that none of I think Hyundai is the only one I've run across where they had a commercial that was described. And I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when Toyota sponsored the Academy Awards, they had a couple of described commercials, but it just isn't done very often. The other thing that isn't done that still boggles my mind is we've had sponsorships for closed captioning for decades. Where they come on the show and they tell you the closed captioning has been provided by whoever. We still don't have companies sponsoring the audio descriptions. And, you would think that would be one of the things somebody by now would have figured out, hey, that's a very low entry point as far as the amount of money we'd have to spend to sponsor the audio descriptions. As far as I know, it does not happen. So these are parts of the communication process. Most email newsletters are not accessible, especially images, and that's not on the senders. That's actually on the providers, people like Constant Contact, AWeber, those folks. They don't make it as easy to include alternative text or other labels as they could for their end users. So only people that are motivated to find out how do I add description text to an image in my emails are going to find out how and actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, like when you're recording a podcast, most of us record in video and then we export the audio.
Yes.
But the people who actually listen to your podcast on a podcast player, they're just as blind as I am. So the more information you can give them in the form of descriptions, especially where it applies to an important moment in the episode. Like earlier today, I was interviewing somebody for my podcast, and they said something that I just totally disagreed with. And so I had a very strong head shake several times.
Right.
And the person listening would not have known that had happened,
Yes.
but I made a point of telling them that had happened, because if they aren't watching the video when that episode gets released, they're
Right.
not going to know.
No,
that.
yeah,
So
no,
these
that you're shaking your head in disappointment.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
And so these are things we can do as podcasters to communicate our messages better with our audiences, to build a more loyal following, a stronger connection. And, those are the kind of things that can lead to longer listens, more downloads, and eventually to people willing to invest in your business or sponsor your show or purchase products and services from you. So, this is one of those cases where, as a podcaster, and a lot of people in industries, including the automobile industry, are using podcasts, either B2B, business to business, or B2C, business to consumer.
Right.
And so they really should know that stuff too, but they probably won't find out about it. So I feel like I educate the more independent podcasters like you and me, and help them benefit from things like that. So like, for example, for an audio description for myself, I would tell people that I'm an older Caucasian male with dark brown curly hair with some white and some gray and brown eyes, and that I'm wearing a blue button-down dress shirt. So it doesn't take a lot of information, but that little bit helps them have a little bit better understanding of who they're listening to, for those who will hear this instead of watching this.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And any little bits and pieces can help and can boost the rating. So I appreciate that. But, so much things have been discussed, and it went right into a part of it in terms of the automotive industry. The next question I wanted to ask you was, can you give us a glimpse into how true collaboration happens from first meeting to production in terms of your information about disabilities?
Right. I would say for manufacturers, the most likely first place would be for someone to decide to start including people with disabilities in the many focus groups, product review groups, beta testing groups that they all have. Unfortunately, that requires somebody to decide it's important, and then to reach out to local communities, either advocacy groups for disability or social media communities, or to reach out to local businesses that they happen to know are operated by people with disabilities. So I would say that's the first most important step. Is somebody at some point in the process has to realize the value of communicating their message and improving their products around accessibility. And once they decide that, I like to tell people that finding solutions is more about deciding to find a solution than it is anything else. Because once you decide that there are solutions out there and that you're willing to implement them, no matter how much you may not like them, then solutions are everywhere.
Yeah.
You may have to do some things that you don't enjoy or that are not as effective as you would like in the beginning, but over time you will get better, or you will find better tools or better solutions. So the important thing is somebody in this process has to decide it's important to them. And once they decide that, building an actual team of people to review a website, review a product, give basic general feedback or information on what people with various disabilities want and need in a product or service, that's all easy once you get past the point of somebody has to decide it's important. Now, that decision can come from within the company, or that decision can come from people like me making enough noise on social media or in the news media to where they decide they have no choice but to do it. It could also involve using regulatory tools like the Americans with Disabilities Act, or filing a lawsuit. So those are some of the ways that we can
Why would they have to go to the extreme with the lawsuit?
Because people don't listen.
Well, yeah. You're right.
Now,
You're right.
you
I remember years ago, much younger, I was watching this movie on television, and it was about a gentleman who lost his sight, and it was the first time they had the dogs coming in, the blind see and hear dogs.
right, the seeing eye dogs.
Yeah, the CNI dogs. Yeah, thanks. And I think it was based on a true story that he actually made the breakthrough where the dog was allowed to follow him and take him everywhere he wanted to go. And it wasn't until he went to a restaurant and then the restaurant had him thrown out because dogs weren't allowed at that time. And he sued them, went to court, and then they set up all these obstacles within the courtroom to try to test to see if the dog actually could do the stuff that they said it would have done. And it actually made the breakthrough to see where people can have their dogs along with them. It was a really touching story, but I'm talking about like over 30 years ago. It actually have to take a lawsuit to open people's eyes to show them exactly what needs to be done. And it's a sad reality, and it's a sad world we live in. And
right, it doesn't always take a lawsuit. It doesn't always take a negative social media campaign. It doesn't always take a negative news story. And I'm generally not one of the people who would want to get change through those types of negative approaches, because
Right.
what I've learned over time about accessibility and inclusion is that when people do things out of fear, they do them to the least minimum standard possible.
Mhm.
They comply, they submit, they follow the bare letter of the law as far as what the regulations tell them a website or a product should look like. That's what happens when you go at it from fear. That's why I prefer not to see things accomplished that way. When you can help a business or an individual come to understand that improving accessibility is in their best interest, their financial best interest, then not only will they do it, but they will go beyond the minimal standards. They will
Yeah.
find ways to embrace that accessibility that people writing regulations not only never thought of, but because of the way regulations are built, could never think of.
Yeah.
So I prefer to talk about the accessibility advantage. I have had many great conversations over my almost 17 years online now, where I have been able to get things accomplished with a particular website or app because I reached out to the owner. I said, I'm visually impaired. These are the tools I'm using. I would like to be able to use your website or app for a particular purpose. So far, I'm not able to do that. I would love to talk to you and see if we can't figure out some way that I can do that. And most of the time that resulted in a conversation where we looked at the possible solutions and figured out what would work best based on the business's abilities and mine. Sometimes that was done, having things done for me. Sometimes that was having things done with me. Sometimes over time, that meant they would improve things to where I could do things myself. A combination of those three has been part of it. But a big part of it has just been the positive approach and not insisting on my own solutions or insisting on those solutions immediately.
Mhm.
Because, a lot of the fear-based stuff is around immediate compliance as well.
Right, right. And then you want to see that whatever compliance is there is not just it's not only assisting one set of people, but it should also in collaboration to assist as many as possible. Right. You touched on two things earlier, and one is of concern to everyone, and I'm glad you brought that up, which is we're all getting old. We will get old if we live long enough. And we're going to be, some of us are going to be losing our sight, our hearing, our mobility to move around. And that is not captured as part of having a disability. People are being, a lot of the mobile devices for persons with physical disabilities now are being retrofitted with lights and reflectors and everything else. So they're all happening slowly but surely. Nothing is ever long overdue. But here's the bottom line. The cars of tomorrow will be judged by who they include, as you mentioned, not who they actually leave out. I want to say a big thanks to Maxwell Ivey Jr. for sharing a vision that goes way beyond just checking a box. And if you want real leadership, you need real inclusion built into every steering wheel, every seat, and every start button. I want everyone to drop a comment to think if you think your favorite car brand is doing enough, or if they think it's just ticking boxes. Smash that like button if you believe in innovation. And if innovation should work for everyone, you want to reach out to Maxwell, give your support, collaborate with him, and get to know much, much more in terms of accessibility as a service. And we will catch you in the next episode.